Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Well, this is the big day.
Yes, it is.
Big day to have Mueller grilled by all those smart congressmen. So I guess we need to sort all this out, which I don't have any intention of sorting out all the minutia because there sure is a lot of it. But there's some big pictures here too.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on? And I've decided that there are two things that I've gathered so far, and this is really astute. It's all about politics, and it has nothing to do with justice.
Yeah.
And they go on, and who's going to be the power mongers in the next year or two. And of course, this boils down to what the Democrats are up to, because if you look at the detail, it's sort of like the Mueller report had been interpreted that they really didn't have much on Trump, and they could push this aside and go on to dealing with foreign policy or something. But no, they haven't been able to do that. But today was supposed to be the day, and so far it's still ongoing as we do our program. It'll go on for a couple more hours. There may be some bombshells. But the little bit that I did get to watch this morning, I thought Jim Jordan was just great.
Yeah.
And he honed in on the important thing. How did this all get started? And that's where the real corruption is. You know, there's a lot of corruption in this, and a lot of misinformation. And I think eventually historians will sort this all out and will know. But will that be before the next year's election? But I think the Democrats are, working diligently, and their whole goal is to just keep it open so that they can get enough votes to open up hearings on impeachment, to keep that going all next year. And that will have an effect, because when you listen to the Democrat side and they say, oh, well, that might be true, that's something, maybe we should be concerned. But when you hear somebody like Jim Jordan say, look, this is a bunch of baloney, but right now, the big problem I see for the Republicans is the spin is always difficult, and finding the truth is difficult. When Trump put it pretty well, when you turn up on all those other states, it's all fake news.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get down to the bottom of it. So, but I know you've gotten down to the bottom and you understand this side, and we're going to appoint you to sort all this out and tell us what's going to happen next year.
Well, I wish I could do that, Dr. Paul, but I can't. There's so many curlicues in this, and other people, Aaron Maté, we've read his stuff, and he's done a great job of taking it apart. But I think today's testimony was interesting, and I watched a few hours of it. I think it's about to wrap up, actually, within the next hour. They'll probably drag it out a bit more. But a few things that I found remarkable. First of all, I think the Democrats were surprised by Mueller's demeanor. I think they were surprised that he was a bit laconic. He was a bit sort of almost sleepy. And I think some people were shocked, feeling that maybe he's getting a little long in the tooth. He's not thinking right. But actually, I think I wouldn't say that. I think he's very clever. And in every question that was challenging, you very slowly asked the member to repeat the question, doubling the time, before he had to respond. It's an old trick that you remember from the committee hearings for very good, very experienced witnesses. I think he was proving himself a master at it today.
That was one of the reasons my approach when I interviewed and asked questions, and people criticized me for it because they said, you talk too long. I said, yeah, I ask a short question and they take up my 4.5 minutes and I get nothing. So I thought, well, I have the platform, so I'm going to get a little bit of a message out. But, in looking at this and how it started, I thought it was interesting about Biden saying, boy, if we'd have been in charge, none of this would have happened. We would have caught those Russians. And here it did. It actually originated, a lot of this mess under Obama. But when I look at all this thing going on, and even for the appointment of Mueller, it's almost a conspiracy to frame Trump. I mean, they were taking this information. They had a little bit of information early on for Hillary and Republicans, and then it became a big deal. Once they knew that Trump was going to be the nominee, that they started using the Russiagate. They created the Russiagate, and I think that's where Jordan Washington is so good at is pointing out how this thing got started. And I think factually the Republicans should come out well, but that doesn't mean that they will, because there's a lot of people in the media that will do anything because it is hatred. And I think Mueller was questioned about, Strzok and Carter, Page, you mean they didn't like the president? No, they hated his guts. Yeah. So I think it was a gimmick on their part to see if they could frame the president. And really, so far, if they'd have had the evidence to crucify the president, something would have happened by now. Even though they say, well, we can't indict him, but in the media you can indict anybody you want, and they haven't been able to do that. I think that he's still alive and well, politically speaking, and yet so far it doesn't look like today will be a conclusive event. But my thoughts are they're going to still work very hard to paint this in a way that they have to have impeachment. They get to the bottom of this. So we'll see what happens.
And one of the reasons why I think our show is unique, I hope it's unique, is that we neither love nor hate the president. We're not on Team A or Team B, Team R or Team D. We're trying to look objectively at what's happening. But I think it's clear, and I think if the media were doing its job a little bit better, although some in the independent media are, I have to say, but they would look at this, and like Representative Jordan pointed out and a few others, that this is a covert operation against a democratic election. There's no question about it. They used a dossier which was paid for by the Democratic Party to dig up dirt on Trump. They used that, and they used this meeting between a very low-level Trump campaign employee with an Australian diplomat saying, hey, we got some dirt on Hillary from the Russians, and he was fed that information. That was a plant who fed him that information. Those two things are what spurred the launch of the probe around the 31st of July in 2016. That's what started the you could call it spying on the campaign by the FBI. We know that the CIA was in on it. Brennan and Clapper were in on this whole thing. And guess who headed up the probe was, as you pointed out, Peter Strzok, a guy who said we will prevent him from becoming president. So this is a coup. There's no other way of describing it, but nobody's talking about that. Certainly the Democrats aren't talking about that today.
The whole theme in this last couple of years is Trump was in bed with the Russians, and the Russians were doing this. And in a way, this whole episode right now, the whole investigation and this hearing they're holding today should be Russia's on trial.
Yeah, sure.
But they're not talking that much about Russia, are they? I'm not saying hardly anything, because I think Russia has been exonerated on this, and they're not even trying to say that. And even early on, and I never enjoyed this subject, but early on, I was, why are the Russians doing this and using the internet and doing this? And here I learned this thing about clickbait.
Yeah.
and somebody explained to me, well, it might be a couple people there taking advantage of this. The Russians are pretty energetic with how to make a buck, and they're just making a buck off this, and they're getting a lot of hits, and that sort of is an explanation. But I think it's interesting that they're not on today trying to crucify. They're not even talking about Russia and the collusion of Trump, because they obviously don't have the evidence.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I haven't heard, maybe I missed it, I haven't heard a single Democrat mention Russia or collusion or anything of that nature. Everything now is about obstruction, and the whole thing rests on the fact that President Trump allegedly, maybe he did, said, I got to get rid of that guy Mueller. I got to fire this guy. What am I going to do? Which is, considering the circumstances, is not that unusual.
Right.
For him to be angry about the probe.
No, and I think that's a reasonable thing to say. Boy, I'd like to get rid of that guy. And but where's the evidence that he did? But thinking out loud, and it's too bad that thinking out loud is never secret. You can't even talk to one other person, and they're thinking out loud. Well, but it's still pretty amazing though that there is supposed to be the contention with Republicans and Democrats. Democrats. So they have this charge, and we have a Republican president. And at the time, we had a Republican Congress, so we appoint somebody to get to the bottom of this. At the beginning, there were a lot of Republicans, say, oh, maybe there's a fire there, smoking fire, and we better do it. So they jumped on the bandwagon. But then they end up appointing somebody that, that's a friend of Clinton, and they appointed all these people who worked for Clinton.
Yeah.
And then they're supposed to be objective on that. It's amazing that they were get away with that. I don't know what it is. It almost suggests that maybe Trump has to play this balancing game, because maybe if I overdo it, maybe they have something over here, and who knows what. But it just doesn't make a lot of sense that the Republican administration that's in charge of appointing these people would end up with a bunch of people who hate his guts.
And there's plenty to criticize Trump on, but you can imagine the scenario. He sees this thing unfolding. He knows there was no collusion, which has been proven now. And he sees this Mueller thing erupting, and all of a sudden Mueller hires, someone said 14 Democrats and 0 Republicans. I don't know how accurate that is, but certainly the whole investigation was very heavily weighted with people who hated Trump and wanted to get rid of him. You can imagine the president sitting here thinking, I'm going to be roped. They're going to crucify me. They're going to make this stuff up, which they have a lot of, and saying, I got to get rid of this. I got to stop this guy. It doesn't seem that outrageous. And Mueller even said today, responding to a question, that the president can fire a special counsel. He can fire an FBI director according to Article 2 of the Constitution. So he was certainly in his rights to do so if he felt it was being unfairly pursued, which certainly the evidence would suggest that.
Well, there's still another investigation going on by the Justice Department, and maybe they will get to the bottom of this on who really started it. But there's some good news in this, too. Overall, in this last year or two, there's been a few FBI people, FBI leaders, CIA leaders involved in this, and it's evil that this is having a bad cop. But what it has done, it has undermined confidence in our government policing authorities. And people say, oh, that is terrible. We can't do this. We better push it aside. You have to have confidence in these people. No, not if they're criminals. not if they're setting up. These are bad guys. And I think the American people overall see that. They see that there was corruption there. Certainly the Trump followers would know and understand it, and maybe even excessively so, that how bad they are, because I'm sure the FBI people, I have friends and relatives have been in these organizations, and we even have people on here that used to be in the CIA, and they went in with sincere intent and want to protect the security of the country. But that's not what these people were doing. They had no interest whatsoever. What they were doing was undermining the rule of law, and that's what I started my program off with today. This has nothing to do with justice, and it will come maybe later when they find out how this really got started. Maybe there will be some justice, but already information is helpful, and I think there's a lot more information now and understanding than there was 2 years ago. It just didn't turn out the way the Democrats wanted to. They thought they could get rid of Trump, in a couple of months because we got the goods and we'll pin him on him. But they knew themselves they were, trying to frame him for doing something that didn't exist. But maybe in some way it worked. That the truth came out to the point where they didn't get away with it. So far.
So far, key. But even though and you through your career, you're not a huge fan of these secret government, the CIA, the FBI, but we recognize that there are decent people that are trying to make a difference and doing a good job, and they're not the ones that are involved in this. But, I'm thinking, why are they not talking about Russia? Why are the Democrats not use the word Russia, which is what the whole thing is about?
Russiagate.
It's because the central allegation of Mueller, okay, first of all, no collusion, that's it. He proved that. So they're desperate for this idea of their obstruction, which is, a different story. But absent that, here's what the Mueller report did. This is how they punted. They said the Russian government engaged in multiple systematic efforts to interfere in our election, and that allegation deserves the attention of every American. Keyword there being allegation, because he had no proof in his entire report of what he claimed there. And the whole Russia interfered was based on two different things. One, the claim in his report that Russian military intelligence hacked the DNC and gave that information to WikiLeaks. And the second is that a government-linked troll farm, the Internet Research Agency, pushed pro-Hillary or pro-Trump, anti-Hillary ads on Facebook and social media. Those are the only two things. On the hack, I mean, we're going over old things, but why didn't they interview Assange? Assange, here's what he said. He's willing to discuss technical evidence ruling out certain parties. He was willing to talk to Mueller and tell him and explain why it wasn't the Russian government. Comey ordered his people to stand down, to not interview him. Why is that the case? Why did they never investigate the server? Why did they let a company hired by the Democratic Party do the investigation of the server and then just take whatever they have? You know?
Well, these people have heard the explanation. When you have an empire, truth is treason.
Yeah.
And why talk to a guy like Assange? Because I think that's been his whole life, was trying to tell the truth and expose what was really going on. But I think they need to, and maybe they've already done it, they've dropped the whole term of Russiagate. Maybe it ought to be called FBI Gate because there's a lot of corruption in the FBI, and they've already fired a lot of people. So, but the mechanism is wrong, you know. And right now, what we were reporting on yesterday, they want it much easier, you know, to even take domestic people and punish them for, you know, sedition and spying and all these things. So, no, there's too much power, and the Pompeos are still there, the Boltons are there, and because they're for the empire, they don't really care about the details of justice, because both of those individuals say that it is proper, you know, to lie to protect the state. You know that is your job, to lie to the people so they don't rebel against the state. That's why they hate Assange so much, because truth is unbearable to people who live with a system of morality which is arbitrary and decided by those in power. And that's what's going on.
You've described Washington D.C. perfectly. You know. But on the second leg of this too is the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, the claim that they were the troll farm. They were the ones the Russian government was pushing. And Mueller has made this claim. And this is what's fascinating, actually. I'm sure a lot of our viewers are very astute and they know this. But a federal judge told Mueller and the State Department to stop making that claim publicly, because there is a case going on where one of the people that was indicted by one of the companies, Concord, indicted by Mueller, said, okay, we'll show up. We'll fight this. They hired some lawyers. They want to do discovery. Show us what you got. And all of a sudden, Mueller's backing off. So the federal judge said, you have got to stop making this claim that this Internet Research Agency is tied to the Russian government, because you have provided no evidence, and we've seen no evidence of it. So that's a huge undercutting of the second critical thing. So both of those are essentially undercut. Here's an interesting point. This Internet Research Agency is said to have tipped the scales in favor of Trump with a few Facebook ads. They spent $100,000 between 2015 and 2017. Only $46,000 in ads was spent before the election. Compare this to $2 billion that both campaigns spent on it. This is not even at 0.00000. So even if they were everything they said, the idea that it had anything to do with it is bogus. But I would just say Dr. Paul is the one who said this is going to be the next year's, I don't want to take his thunder, but next year is going to be all about impeachment, and this is setting the stage. That may well be the case. You've got to wonder if this is the Democrats' plan A, to retain the House, gain some seats, and to win the presidency. I don't know if this is going to fly. So final thing, about 12 hours left to apply for the Ron Paul Scholar Seminar if you're an upper division undergrad or grad student. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org, and there's a link. We've got Dr. Paul. I'm really terrified. We have so many applicants for our staff to go through, and they're all looking so good. It's going to be heartbreaking to turn people away.
Keep your names. We'll probably have to do this another day.
That's
as
right.
Well.
We'll do something else with them.
Yeah. No, this is amazing to me that this fighting goes on, and it's powerful. But, you know, I complain a lot that there's so much bipartisanship that goes on. And just look at the budget. that is so atrocious. And it was done openly and smiling faces, Republican and Democrat. So you have philosophy, whether it's the foreign policy or monetary policy, spending, deficits, all this. There's really no disagreement. They don't really fuss about that. There's even only a little bit even within the Republican Party. But when it comes to power, this is personal. People are ego-driven, and power is what they're looking for. So they're not dealing with changing the nature of our country, where our liberties have been lost, where we fight wars that we shouldn't have, why we don't have a Fourth Amendment, and we're facing a financial crisis. That has no answers and no interest, because if they did, they would have to shrink the size of the empire. And the empire, management of the empire is more important than the liberties of the people and the prosperity of the people. So that is not difficult. So we just wave a wand and said, from now on, that we cannot have a Congress that engages in economic intervention in our personal lives if there's no violence, and intervention in the affairs of other nations. That is what we would advocate, and believe me, we could then look at a world with a lot more peace and prosperity. Thanks for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.